For most of this video, I will be comparing and contrasting Metal Gear Solid 2 with its prequel, Metal Gear Solid. This is because Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is very similar to its prequel, except that it's way better. Basically, every point of criticism that I had in my MGS1 review has been fixed in the sequel. MGS2 is what MGS1 should have been. Not only is the game technically better than its prequel in areas such as graphics and controls, but it's also better in its storytelling and gameplay, which is really what's most important to me in the long run. I'll save the story and gameplay for later discussion, but first, let's talk about how Sons of Liberty surpasses its predecessor simply in the way that it feels. Metal Gear Solid 1 was hard to control, there's no denying that. Snake was slow, and his movement felt restricted. It was hard to run away from enemies, it was hard to do simple tasks like opening a door, and most importantly, it was hard to aim a single shot. MGS2 fixes this in more ways than I can even describe. You now have several more options for mobility. You now feel like you can reach more places without finding yourself glued to a wall. Movement is swift, painless, and fluid. Well, it is most of the time. While it is now significantly easier to flee from an enemy, there are times when you find yourself getting tripped up in weird ways, but the controls are still a huge relief compared to the unnecessary struggle of the first game. And what would good controls matter without a good camera to support them? That's right, Metal Gear Solid 2's camera is way easier and more convenient to use. It still utilizes the same top-down camera angle, where you can't see much of your surroundings without relying on your radar screen, but the game is a lot more careful about letting you see any nearby threats before you unknowingly put yourself in danger. Aside from this, the key difference between the MGS1 camera and the MGS2 camera is the first-person mode. While the first game did have a first-person camera option, it was never very useful because you couldn't use any items while looking through it, and it never tended to show you anything that you couldn't already see on your radar. But the second game makes first-person viewing absolutely critical to success. First-person mode allows you to see all kinds of things from a distance so that you know what obstacles lie ahead. To my delight, you're also able to use weapons in first-person mode, so aiming shots is no longer difficult at all so long as you're able to shoot from a safe distance. While MGS2 may not have mastered its controls and camera mechanics, it certainly makes spying a lot more fun, and that, right there at the core of Metal Gear Solid 2, is what really makes it so much more awesome than its prequel. The gameplay, the spying. Finally, gameplay and spying are one and the same in this game. Sons of Liberty really does that subtitle justice. Tactical espionage action. That's what Metal Gear Solid is all about. A spy sneaking around, encountering all sorts of opposition, but eliminating his threats in the most stealthy way possible. The game makes you feel like a spy. It makes you act like a spy and think like a spy. It pulls this off in two ways. One, by giving you a million ways to sneak around, and two, by giving your enemies a million ways to catch you in the act. In Metal Gear Solid 1, your best bet was to stay out of sight and hide in a box whenever you aroused suspicion. In Metal Gear Solid 2, it's about cunning and careful planning. It requires you to examine your surroundings, think up a plan, and then execute it, all without being caught. There are dozens of different ways for you to evade or incapacitate an enemy guard. You could, for example, put them to sleep, or hide inside a locker, or even disguise yourself in their own uniform. Of course, it's always an option to simply blow their brains out and hide the body, but here's the cool part. The intuitive course of action may not always be the correct one. If you simply shoot a guard dead and then hide his body around a corner, then it's possible that another guard could pass by, notice the blood trail on the floor, and trace it back to find your hiding spot. At this point, the guard would call reinforcements, and that's when your cover would be blown. And besides just blood trails, the guards will most likely react to other clues too. They'll pick up on subtle things like wet footprints, AWOL coworkers, or suspiciously incongruous cardboard boxes. And, of course, they will be able to hear you if you shoot with an unsilenced weapon. All of these details and more have to be taken into consideration before you can successfully slip past them. It's unpredictable variables like these that make the game feel so strategy-based. Every individual room you enter feels like its own discrete puzzle. That is tactical espionage action if I've ever seen it. Now, if there's one thing you should know about the Metal Gear Solid series, know that each game feels like a movie. Not only because it contains such dramatized action, but literally because there's such a balanced ratio of cutscenes to gameplay. A large percentage of your Metal Gear Solid 2 experience will unavoidably consist of cutscenes, but in the case of this specific game, that's really not a bad thing. And that's because the story is so freaking cool. It's suspenseful and thought-provoking every step of the way. There's action and drama and plot twists and crazy supervillain philosophies, and all the ingredients for the world's best action movie. The game actually got me to care about what was going on. It made me want to pay attention and want to learn more. And the more I got invested, the more it blew my mind away. Although the story was incredibly clever and well-written and frankly brilliant, I will say, on the contrary, that I found a few specific characters to have strange writing and or performances. I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just say that there's a new main character alongside Solid Snake. This new main character appears throughout most of the game's cutscenes, but I always thought he was a little too whiny and melodramatic about the way he talked about himself. It seemed like every conversation he had always turned to him going on and on about how dark and brooding he is. And his girlfriend was whiny too. Like, all she ever talked about was how he would never open up to her and reveal his feelings. The two young adults just keep going back and forth about emotional problems that they're basically just making up out of thin air. I don't know what they see in each other. They both seem unsatisfied with how the other treats them. And I really don't know why this whole emotional side plot is necessary to the game's action-based story. It's kind of boring to sit there and put up with this stuff. But I digress. Back on the topic at hand, Metal Gear Solid 2's story is definitely something you'll want to experience for yourself. Although, I'm telling you right now, you should not play this game if you haven't already played the first one, because if you do, then you'll be completely lost. Well now, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. It was so cool. Not perfect by any means, it certainly had its moments of jankiness and confusion, and there were times when I was wondering, how the heck was I supposed to figure that out? But it was exactly the kind of game I was expecting out of the famous Metal Gear franchise. It had a compelling movie-like story, which gets really interesting by the end, and it kept me thoroughly enjoying myself with all its tactical espionage action. This game has successfully turned me into a Metal Gear fan, and I can't wait to play the third game. But, you know, that'll be another video for another time. I rate this game 8 out of 10. Play it. Seriously. Play the first game first, just to catch up on the story, but after you're done with that, play MGS2, I beg you. Whether you get an original copy or buy the Legacy Collection, it doesn't really matter. Personally, I prefer to play my games the authentic way, but it sure does seem awfully convenient to buy all those games in just one package. And that concludes my review of Metal Gear Solid 2. Have you ever played it? Did you agree or disagree with anything that I said? Or have I convinced you to give it a try? Please let me know in the comments below. After all, I do read everything you guys have to tell me. I'll see you guys in a few weeks with whatever I decide to do next. Until then, Illusion out.
Bruh, look at this dude. Wait till you see the. No, 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 no.